She didn't take a single thing. Her phone, her handbag, her meds, the kind of stuff nobody just walks away from. Not in the dead of night, not without a plan, and definitely not without saying a word to anyone. When the family pulled up to Nancy's place on February 1st, they found the back doors propped wide open. Inside, it was all there. Her phone, her purse, her medication. It looked like she'd stepped out for a second and just never came back. Not a single thing of value was missing from that house. That one detail is where this story really begins. Look, you probably know the headlines by now. You've been following the updates. You know who Nancy Guthrie is. 84 years old, a woman of deep faith and fierce independence, and the mother of Savannah Guthrie. We know she was last seen on the night of January 31st. Her son-in-law dropped her off at her place. It was her home in the Catalina foothills in Tucson around 9:48 p.m. Her garage door shut just 2 minutes later. Then, at 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, her doorbell camera went dark. By about 2:12 a.m., another camera caught a glimpse of someone, but there's no footage. Then, at 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker lost its connection to the monitoring app on her phone. She was reported missing later that morning when she didn't show up. And there was blood. Just a few drops of it found on the front porch and trailing down the path toward the driveway. Tests confirmed that blood belonged to Nancy. Since then, there have been ransom notes demanding millions, and she's still gone. But there's a detail here that might not have sunk in yet, something the evidence is forcing investigators to really look at. It was right there in front of us from day one. Nothing was stolen. On March 26th, Savannah Guthrie sat down. She gave her first televised interview since her mom disappeared, talking with her old Today co-host, Hoda Kotb. That conversation aired in 3 parts over March 26th and 27th. During that sit-down, she confirmed it. She confirmed exactly what the family's been struggling to process since February 1st. Those back doors were left wide open. None of it made any sense. They wondered if someone came in with a stretcher and just carried her out the back. But her phone was still there. So was her purse. All her personal belongings were right where they should have been. The doors were left open, but everything else stayed put. Her phone, her bag, all her things. Think about what that list actually represents. Her phone. In 2026, a phone isn't just a piece of tech. It's your wallet, your medical history, your bank, your GPS. It's your whole lifeline to the outside world. Most people grab their phone before they even put on their shoes. Leaving it behind on purpose? It's just not natural. It's incredibly rare. And the purse? No ID, no cash, no cards, no keys. The very things that give you freedom, the tools that let you move through the world were just sitting there. Then there's the medication. This is the heavy part. Nancy's 84 years old. She's got a pacemaker. According to Savannah, she was living with some pretty intense pain. A bad back made it hard for her to even get around. That daily medicine wasn't optional, it was a medical requirement. If she missed it for more than a few days, the results would be dangerous. Yet, there it was, still on the counter. Savannah put the question out there during that interview, and we're still waiting for an answer. How does this happen? How is it even possible that they're forced to make a video pleading with a kidnapper who took an 84-year-old woman? How can we be in a position where we're talking to someone who snatched a grandmother from her own home? In the dead of night, in her pajamas, with no shoes and no medicine, this tiny woman out there in the dark, just her pajamas. No shoes, no phone, no medication, no purse, just gone. Think about that. An 84-year-old with a pacemaker and a bad back hauled out of her house at 2 in the morning. Someone in the family realized what was happening immediately. Savannah mentioned her brother Cameron in that March interview. He's a former military intel officer and a fighter pilot. He saw the situation for exactly what it was right away. When Savannah called him during those first few hours of panic, Cameron told her flat out, "I think she's been kidnapped. She's been taken for ransom." Savannah said she fought him on it. She didn't want to believe it. She had to ask, "Do you think it's because of me?" And he told her, "I'm so sorry, sweetie, but yeah, maybe." He said, "Yeah, maybe. This is a man trained to recognize threat patterns, someone who reads the scene and knows the score. He could identify the crime just by hearing the description of the house. That tells you how specific this was. It was about what was found at that house. It wasn't a mystery, not to someone with that kind of background. The house was telling a story no one wanted to hear. Nancy was gone, her essentials were untouched, and the doors were open, swung wide. Cameron scanned the room in a heartbeat. Right from that first morning, investigators could hear what the house was trying to tell them. Sure, she hadn't just walked out, but the clues were doing way more than just proving she'd been taken against her will. The scene was painting a portrait of the abductor, what they were after, or maybe more importantly, what they weren't. See, when money's the motive, there's always a breadcrumb trail. A thief grabs the television, a mugger goes for the cash. If a kidnapper's only looking for a payday, they don't leave a wallet sitting on the counter. They don't leave the phone behind either. Anything they can flip for cash or use as leverage gets taken. But the mess left in Nancy Guthrie's place, that spoke volumes. Come February 1st, the way that house looked just didn't scream robbery. Everything a thief would have wanted was still right there. Every single thing a greedy perp would have snatched the phone for digital leverage, the ID for control was untouched. Those personal items that act as proof of life or custody, still sitting on that counter, and that's where things start getting weird. It's the same question former FBI agents are putting on the record right now. If it wasn't about the cash, then what was the point? We got to talk about those ransom notes, because they're the one thing that makes this whole motive question feel so messy. There were real demands, hard deadlines. They even named a price, $6 million, payable in Bitcoin. KGUN9 in Tucson and TMZ both confirmed the same chilling number, $6 million in digital currency. Those letters landed at KGUN9, KOLD News 13, and TMZ during the first few days of February. Inside were two very specific facts about Nancy's home that the cops say were never released to the public. They knew exactly where her Apple Watch was tucked away and that a floodlight on the house was busted. Harvey Levin from TMZ noted that the watch wasn't sitting anywhere obvious, it was hidden in a spot you'd have to look for. Over at KOLD, Mary Coleman pointed out that the letter had insider details, things only a real kidnapper would actually know. FBI Special Agent Heath Janke confirmed it all at a briefing. That kind of detail, it's everything. You don't get that from a random creep stalking a rich person online. That's the kind of info you only have if you've been there. Someone had been on that property, they knew the layout, and they'd given the family two separate deadlines. First deadline, 5 p.m. on February 5th. Second, February 9th. Both came and went, and not a single cent changed hands. During her interview in March, Savannah was cautious. She's convinced most of the notes floating around were just sick hoaxes. She thinks they were just vultures preying on a family's pain. But those two notes the family actually engaged with, I'm leaning toward those being the real deal. Detectives have been zeroing in on those two and the dates they laid out. Both dates passed in total silence. And that's exactly where the kidnapping for cash story starts to fall apart. See, when it's all about the money, that deadline is the most critical moment for the entire operation. It's the climax they've been working for, their big moment of leverage. Everything before that is just the warm-up. After that, you're either getting paid or getting mean. When a deadline hits and nothing happens, a real kidnapper makes a move. No cash moves, no drop-off is made, and no talking. A guy looking for a payday usually does one of two things next. They either double down with a threat or they start wheeling and dealing. They got to do something because they need that cash. That's why they risked it all. Why they caught a federal charge, why they're still hiding a human being. Every second she's in their hands is a massive liability. Yet, the person behind those demands for Nancy Guthrie, they didn't do a thing. 5 p.m. came and went, and there were no threats, no follow-up, no counteroffers, just nothing. The second deadline was just as quiet as the first. Now, to be fair, the cops haven't officially ruled out private messages. At this level, the feds keep their cards close to their chest. It's possible stuff was happening that we just didn't see. But look at the facts. 2 deadlines, 0 payments, and a case that's no longer being talked about as a simple kidnapping. Neither the Pima County sheriffs nor the FBI in Phoenix are calling this an active negotiation anymore. That's a massive shift in tone, and the ones who caught it first weren't the reporters on the beat. It was the ex-feds, the guys who know exactly what it means when the official language starts to pivot. Harry Trombitis spent a lifetime chasing kidnappers for the Bureau, when Yahoo News sat down with him for his take. His view on the Nancy Guthrie investigation was cold and clinical. He didn't waste words. He spoke with that specific kind of calm you only get from years on the inside. He wasn't one for hype. He wouldn't guess beyond the hard facts. And the facts, he said, make a ransom motive look less likely every single day. There's just too much at stake here. There are far too many ways for people they're going to get caught. When pushed on, what besides money could possibly explain this crime? Trampus laid out a few other options. Options that investigators are likely already digging into. The motive could be revenge, or maybe just some kind of deep-seated anger. Or it could be for a third reason, something we haven't even considered yet: revenge, rage, or a third hidden purpose. Trampus also spoke directly about the investigation's future. The FBI and local law enforcement aren't going to stop working this case. He remembered one case with 5,700 tips, and it was actually tip number 5,444 that finally cracked it. He promised the FBI and the sheriff's office are still incredibly busy following up on the thousands of leads and tips that have come in, and he says more are arriving every single day. He stayed very specific about the hope for a resolution. He doesn't think people should just assume that we're never going to bring her back home. Not at all. He noted they've proven time and again that they can recover people even after a long period of time. That's a man with boots on the ground experience in these crimes, speaking on the record, saying that this investigation is still very much alive. The ending isn't written yet, and this case certainly isn't cold. That isn't the talk of a man who thinks this is still a kidnapping for ransom with a real negotiation happening. It's the talk of someone who's looked at the behavioral and forensic profile of this crime and realized the financial story just doesn't fit. He names the categories that do: a personal grudge, anger, or something that hasn't been identified or named yet. And Trampus isn't alone in thinking the obvious story is insufficient. Let's talk about what it means when a ransom looks less likely, because it changes where this whole analysis is headed. See, kidnappings for ransom are all about leverage. The kidnapper's power comes entirely from the victim being alive and reachable. A living victim is the only real asset. If you remove that asset, then everything the kidnapper risked just collapses. The entire structure of a ransom crime depends on the person they took staying alive. That's the whole point. This is why professional ransom crews keep the lines open. They provide proof of life. They settle in for negotiations. They're patient because their patience is tied to the value of what they're holding. As long as she's alive, they have power. The longer the victim stays alive and verifiable, the longer that leverage exists. But that isn't what's happening here. When a former Fed says ransom is looking less likely, he's telling us in careful law enforcement language that the behavioral signature of this crime doesn't match the profile of someone who was ever doing this for money. In this light, those ransom notes weren't the reason for the crime. They were just the costume it was wearing. That brings us to the second expert who's spoken on the record. Retired FBI agent Andrew Bringwell, now in New York. Bringwell currently runs a private security firm, and he spoke to Newsweek about what the physical evidence at the scene reveals. He looked at what happened the night Nancy Guthrie was taken. His exact words were, "Without knowing if anything was stolen, my opinion is the subject's intent was to kidnap Mrs. Guthrie, but something went wrong. There was violence and she was injured, but not killed." That one qualifier, my opinion, and the part about the theft, they really matter. Bringwell isn't giving a confirmed police finding. He's offering a behavioral and forensic assessment from a career investigator. That assessment breaks down into 4 heavy pieces. First, the intent was to kidnap. Whatever happened wasn't random. It wasn't opportunistic. It wasn't just someone who wandered in looking for cash and ran into a homeowner. In his reading of the evidence, the plan was always a targeted removal of one specific person. Bringwell also noted that, given the preparation, this likely wasn't the perpetrator's first time committing a crime, but something went wrong. In profiling, that phrase describes a moment where the plan starts to drift. It doesn't mean he was shocked someone was home, it means the operation just didn't go the way it was designed. Bringell's theory is that the subject underestimated Mrs. Guthrie. He said, if she resisted, he hurt her. In her state, that violence could have led to tragic consequences he didn't plan for. An 84-year-old woman in pajamas and a pacemaker who fought back, and in doing so changed the entire nature of this crime. Violence took place. We already knew that from the blood on the front porch and the trail to the driveway. Blood that was confirmed to be Nancy's. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden looked at the crime scene photos and told Fox News about those pale-centered droplets, the kind where blood from the nose or mouth mixes with thin air. It's the kind of spray that happens when someone is struggling to breathe, leaving a dark, silent trail into the night. He told Fox News the blood had pale centers, the telltale sign airs mixed in, likely coughed from a nose or mouth. The scene was textbook for a kidnapping. Maureen O'Connell, a retired agent with the FBI, looked at those blood patterns for News Nation and saw that since there were no gaps in the pattern, no breaks in the trail, Nancy was definitely carried out, not walked. In my head, I see her wrapped up in something while they're carrying her out of there, and that's why those blood droplets are all perfectly round. In my mind, she's wrapped up in a sheet while they're moving her out, O'Connell said. Bringell puts that violence in context. It wasn't the plan, but a pivot. He points to the 1991 snatching of Carrie Lawson, that Alabama lawyer whose body was never recovered. Just like this case, it started as a cold-blooded grab for a ransom. Bringell told Newsweek the Lawson case closed, but only after the suspect killed her, hid her, and then took his own life. The Lawson case still haunts him. That comparison is no accident. She was hurt, yeah, but she wasn't dead. She was breathing when she left. Bringell is firm on this. Look, if his intention was to murder her right there, he could have easily done it with the weapon on him. He wasn't against using violence. The evidence shows he definitely hurt Mrs. Guthrie. The weapon was there. The choice to use it lethally wasn't made. That's a specific behavioral choice. It tells us something about what his original intent was and exactly what it was not. If she was alive when she left that house, where has she been for nearly 2 months? This is what the evidence, taken all together, makes possible to reconstruct. The person who broke into Nancy Guthrie's home in the early hours of February 1st between 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m. when that pacemaker app finally disconnected, they didn't just do this on a whim. They'd picked the house, marked her as the target, and even prepped all the ransom notes. These aren't the moves of someone acting on a whim. Criminologists call this a planned instrumental offense, a crime with a specific goal, method, and an exit strategy. Whoever did this had a plan. And according to Andrew Bringwell, the plan failed. Understanding that failure is the key to understanding the trail they left and why the investigation shifted gears like it did. A kidnapping that goes right is clean. You get a controlled scene, almost no physical evidence, and a line of communication that starts immediately. The guy in charge isn't panicking. He's running a business. He's just made the opening move in a high-stakes trade. But when things go sideways during the grab, the kidnapper's whole headspace shifts entirely. Control turns into a crisis. Every single decision starts to accelerate. Choices disappear. They're forced to make moves they never saw coming. That blood on the porch and the driveway, that's the sound of the plan hitting a wall, human resistance. Whatever went down inside that house, it was loud and it was messy. When a plan hits a wall, the perpetrator has to pivot. They can back off, get more brutal, or run. But no matter what they choose, the crime they're committing isn't the one they walked in there to do. Bringell believes she was bleeding but alive when they took her, meaning that first choice wasn't fatal. She left the property. She was in their hands. She was hurt, but she was alive. And those ransom notes? They suggest the kidnapper was still clinging to the payday, at least for a little while. But there's a massive hole in that story, a question the evidence screams, but the ransom can't explain. If this was just about money, why'd they go silent after 2 separate deadlines? Why didn't they push harder after the first one? Why wasn't there any proof of life, despite that public "we will pay" video? The family went to social media Savannah, her sister Annie, and her brother Cameron, publicly signaling their compliance. We've heard those reports about a ransom letter in the news too. We need to know without a single doubt that she's alive and that you've actually got her. They heard the message, they promised to pay, they did everything right, but then only silence. Just a heavy, deafening silence. That note, the one Harvey Levin got a look at, started out by claiming Nancy was safe but scared. It's a chilling claim, sitting right alongside a ransom demand that leads nowhere. A demand isn't proof of life, it's just ink on a page. There wasn't one single piece of verifiable word confirming she was actually still alive. Someone who's after cash provides proof that their leverage still exists. You don't buy a car without seeing the engine first. Without that proof, a demand has zero weight. There's no operational reason for a family to pay if they don't know she's still breathing. A kidnapper motivated by money understands this. But a person who doesn't actually need the cash, they don't have a reason to provide proof, because collecting wasn't the point. That's the distinction Harry Trambitas is making. He's looking at revenge and personal rage as the real alternatives. Those are the things that burn much deeper than money. It's a distinction that behavioral profilers and federal analysts have actually categorized as a specific type of crime. Criminologists who study these cases at the federal level distinguish between 2 fundamentally different types of offenses. They look identical on the surface. The first is a kidnapping, where ransom is the primary goal. The perpetrator wants the money. The victim is just a way to get paid. Survival is absolutely essential to making that transaction work. Every part of it, who they pick, the contact, the demand, it's all calibrated to get a financial result. But then there's the second kind, a crime where the ransom is just a cover story. The perpetrator has a different motive, personal, relational, or something darker. But that ransom framework, it gives them 2 things the truth can't. It points the cops in the wrong direction, and it buys them time. Time is the critical variable here. When a case is framed as a ransom case from the start, the investigation changes. Resources get dumped into tracking bank accounts, watching Bitcoin wallets, and managing the family's phones. Everything is focused on the negotiation protocols and the digital trail. It's a very specific, narrow focus. The posture in an active ransom negotiation is fundamentally different from a case where survival isn't the priority. A negotiation response waits. It's patient by design. It's built to give the perpetrator room to breathe, time to move, and space to put some distance behind them. It makes the trail much harder to follow. And that ransom story also controls how the family behaves. In those first critical hours, a family that believes their loved one is held for money acts a certain way. They're different from a family who fears she's been permanently hurt. This framework doesn't just redirect the police. It stops the people who might ask dangerous questions about who actually did this and why they wanted her gone. Now, look at the Nancy Guthrie case. Those ransom notes arrived right as the family realized Nancy was missing. Law enforcement and the public swallowed it whole. They saw it as a kidnapping for ransom. It was a crime with a playbook and a clear way to solve it. It made sense to them. But the behavioral evidence from day one was already undercutting that narrative. Nothing was missing from the house. A kidnapper after money takes the phone. It's their control and their proof of custody in a negotiation. They take her identification, her meds, and her personal things. A financially motivated kidnapper either takes that evidence or they destroy it so the cops can't use it. They don't leave it all sitting right there. They don't leave it in a tidy arrangement on the counter like she just stepped out for a walk. Then there's the blood. That trail of blood and the violence Bramwell confirmed, it doesn't fit the financial model in one big way. Financially motivated kidnappers don't want injured victims. A victim who's bleeding out is a massive liability. An injured victim creates medical urgency. They're a risk. They're harder to hide, harder to move, and harder to control. And if they aren't treated, they become a dead victim. A dead victim can't generate a ransom. The violence at that scene wasn't a choice that served a payout. It signals a motivation that the ransom framework can't explain. And then there's the silence after the deadlines. It wasn't the silence of a patient negotiator. A kidnapper who needs money can't afford to stay quiet. That's the whole reason they took the risk of a federal crime in the first place, to get paid. That silence after February 5th and again after the 9th isn't patience. It's the behavioral signature of someone who never planned on a payment. Those deadlines were only ever meant to buy time. What does it mean when a kidnapping shows no financial follow-through? When notes expire without a single consequence? When there's no proof of life despite a willing family? When it's done by someone with insider knowledge? It means that, in the assessment of those who know what's really lurking in the dark, criminologists and ex-feds who live and breathe these kinds of cases don't think whoever grabbed Nancy Guthrie was actually after a payday. Those ransom notes? They weren't meant to squeeze $6 million in Bitcoin out of anyone. They were written to buy time, time for the heat to die down, time for the initial chaos of the police response to just fade, to settle into the slow, agonizing crawl of a negotiation that'd never actually lead to a handoff. Time for whoever's behind this to put some real distance between themselves and the crime, distance that's physical, digital, and forensic. If that's the real story, if the ransom was just a smokescreen and not the point, then this isn't your typical kidnapping for cash. It's something much darker. It's an abduction for the sake of concealment, a crime where the person responsible didn't care about getting rich. Their only real goal was making sure Nancy Guthrie would never be found. Now, the cops haven't officially said this. We've got to be clear about that. But it's the only theory that makes sense when you look at the facts. You look at the stuff she left behind, the deadlines that came and went, without a single cent moving, the total lack of any proof she's alive. Then there's the blood on that porch, the insider knowledge of the house itself. Even Harry Trumbus is on the record saying he doesn't buy the ransom story. You've got to ask yourself, what kind of criminal does this actually look like? It fits a very specific profile. Analysts call it a concealment-motivated abduction. That's a crime where the kidnapping isn't about the money at the end. The act of taking her is just the way they make sure she's gone for good. They don't take the victim because she's worth something in a trade. They take her because her just being alive, being able to talk or walk into a police station, is a direct threat to whoever did this. This is the monster hiding behind the ransom note. It's happened before, and people have gone to prison for it, and the pattern is always the same. Look at how they got in. This wasn't some random break-in. The person who walked into that house knew exactly where they were going. They knew the schedule, and the note itself proved they had inside info that the cops picked up on right away. They mentioned specific things like Nancy's Apple Watch and a broken floodlight details that hadn't been leaked to the press yet. Harvey Levin over at TMZ said the way that watch was positioned wasn't something you'd just guess. Heath Janke from the FBI Phoenix field office confirmed those details himself. That's not a note from some stranger who just picked a rich name out of a magazine. That's the voice of someone who knew that house inside and out. See, a kidnapper who wants cash picks someone based on their bank account or their name. But a concealment abductor picks a target because of a personal connection. That's the big divide, targeting the money versus targeting the person. It's one of the main things experts look for when they're trying to figure out what they're dealing with. And every single scrap of evidence in Nancy's case points away from a payday. Just look at what was left behind. If you're looking for concealment, the fact that her phone and purse weren't touched starts to mean something else entirely. Someone who just wants her gone doesn't grab the phone because they don't need it. They aren't trying to hack into her bank. They aren't trying to use her ID for leverage. They aren't there to take things. They're there to make someone disappear. They leave the phone, because whatever's on it doesn't matter to them. And leaving that stuff there, that serves a second purpose. It muddies the waters early on. If nothing's been stolen, the cops might think she just walked away on her own. It looks like a confusing missing persons case instead of a kidnapping. And every hour that ticks by before the cops realize they're looking at a crime scene is another hour that person uses to get far away. That clean counter, the phone, her purse, her meds, those might not have been mistakes. They might have been part of the lie. The ransom notes were just cover. And here's the part that's really hard to stomach. If those notes were written by someone who just wanted her gone, then they had a very specific job to do, and it had nothing to do with $6 million. They bought time, they shifted the whole investigation from a frantic manhunt into a slow, careful, hostage negotiation. It changed the whole vibe of the response. Negotiations are built to be patient and cautious. They don't just dump every search team into the woods the way a manhunt would. A negotiation doesn't immediately treat every single person she knew like a suspect right off the bat. It waits, it's patient, and that gives the killer plenty of room to move. Those two deadlines that just came and went, they fit this perfectly. Those deadlines were never meant to be met. They were just expiration dates on a window of time. And once that clock ran out, the killer likely figured the trail would be cold enough by then to make the final cover-up actually work. That explains the total lack of any verifiable proof of life. Every legit professional ransom kidnapping on the books, from cartel hits in Latin America to high-profile corporate snatches in Europe, comes with real proof the victim is still breathing. It isn't a courtesy. It's the product that justifies the price. Without it, the demand doesn't have any credibility. Without it, a family has no reason to pay. Without it, that ransom note is just a scrap of paper. The Guthrie family asked for it directly. Savannah, Annie, and Cameron went to social media saying, "We got your message. We understand and will pay." They just wanted proof their mother was alive. Cameron said in a separate post, "We haven't heard a thing directly. Reach out. We need a way to talk so we can finally move forward with this. But first, we have to know you actually have our mom." TMZ's Harvey Levin said the note opened by claiming Nancy was safe but terrified, but a promise made inside a document demanding $6 million isn't real proof. It's just a self-serving line from whoever wrote it. No real proof of life was ever handed over. Harry Trombitis called this out directly. If the notes were real, why hasn't any money changed hands yet? That's a former FBI agent with years in extortion cases publicly noting how strange this whole situation is. He saw that the behavioral mechanics of a real ransom job just aren't present in this case. The blood shows a motive that was explicit, there was violence, she was injured. But when you look at the cover-up theory, that injury carries more weight than Branningwell's specific analysis suggests. His take, and he's got the credentials to back it up, is that the violence was an unintended escalation in a ransom job that simply spiraled way out of its original plan. In his view, the kidnapper underestimated Nancy, and the violence was just a messy accident because she fought back. The broader pattern in this video points somewhere else. A guy looking for a payday doesn't want an injured victim. An injury is a liability medically and legally. The violence at that scene didn't help the kidnapper at all. It didn't help anyone whose only goal was collecting $6 million in Bitcoin. It just made every next step harder. That kind of violence belongs in the behavioral analysis of personal crime. It's proof of a motive that the ransom story can't hold a rage that broke through the original plan and left a mark. Experts who study targeted hits see a clear link between overkill and the level of personal hate between the killer and the victim. Violence that creates risk and trouble for the killer, like it did here, usually means the motive was personal. That's why former FBI agents weigh their words as carefully as they do. Trombitis doesn't say the ransom was a fake. He just says it's looking less likely and mentions revenge instead. Branningwell, who thinks it was a ransom job that went sideways, hasn't reached that same conclusion. They're looking at it from different sides, but both agree the ransom story doesn't fully explain the facts. When two veteran federal agents both poke holes in the original motive, that isn't just a coincidence. That's the evidence speaking through the very people who are trained to read it. Setting up a 20 to 24-person task force? That wasn't a routine call. Units this big, pulling these kinds of resources for one case, aren't built for clean kidnappings. Those usually end in a deal. These teams form when the investigative picture is a total mess. It's enough to need the whole federal toolkit, everything from digital forensics to financial intelligence. It involves behavioral units, deep interview protocols, and the power to chase leads across state lines. Sheriff Chris Nanos told NBC Nightly News that investigators think they know why that house was picked. He said, "We believe it was targeted, but we aren't 100% sure just yet." So it would be foolish to tell people, "Don't worry, you aren't the target." He wouldn't rule out the chance that whoever did this might strike again. By February 16th, the PCSD officially cleared the entire Guthrie family. Every sibling and spouse was off the list. The family's been incredibly helpful through all of this. In this case, they're only victims. Nano says these aren't the words of a sheriff with a cold case. They don't sound like an investigation focused on the family either. They sound like an inquiry looking for a suspect on the outside. This path leads to someone outside that close family circle. We've got to be honest about where the investigation actually stood then. In mid-February, CNN cited a source who knew the case details. Detectives didn't have a lead theory and were checking every angle. That meant looking at a botched robbery or a targeted kidnapping. But another source in law enforcement rejected the burglary idea completely. They told Fox News that's just not the unit's working theory. Nanos even admitted it's hard to find motive without a suspect. Everything's just guesswork now, but what Nanos said hasn't changed at all. They're convinced they know why that house was a target. No official motive yet, just a belief about why they chose it. These aren't contradictions, they show a case that finally has direction. It's a case that just doesn't have a public name yet. The evidence pile is likely much bigger than the public records show. Mixed DNA was found, and they're hoping to build a profile. They're checking a busted utility box nearby for any possible link. It's tied to an internet outage right when Nancy was taken. That technical setup points to a plan, not just some random impulse. Police even used a sniffer plane, a helicopter, with specialized tech. This gear was built to find the signal Nancy's pacemaker sends. It pings every 2 or 3 minutes, trying to find her. Since it lost the phone app connection, it was working alone. If they can catch that signal, it might give them a radius. Using that kind of tech isn't standard for most missing persons. It's the move of a team using every forensic tool available. Since February, tens of thousands of tips have hit the department. Also, the family's $1 million reward is still on the table. The department's been very careful about what info gets to the public. Being this careful has frustrated some and confused everyone else. There were times when the stories clashed or the timelines shifted. There were moments when their stance toward the press totally changed. But look at it as an investigation that stopped trying to negotiate. They're quietly building a framework around a motive that's very personal. Managing the narrative makes sense if the killer is actually connected. You don't share your theory. You work it quietly and carefully. You let the public story help the case, not the other way around. Trombus noted this when he looked at Savannah's interview in March. "I really think the sheriff and the family are coordinating this." As a former FBI agent, he said the goal was humanizing Nancy. Detectives are still finding answers that aren't in the public record. That pacemaker cut out at 2:28 a.m. on February 1st. That flight hasn't been confirmed. Here's what we know. The crime, it's still waiting. It all went down in that house between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning on February 1st. Every week that goes by without a cent changing hands, this looks less and less like a kidnapping for money. There's no proof of life, and zero moves from a killer who's actually trying to collect those $6 million. What it's starting to look like instead is a crime built from day one to guarantee just one specific outcome. That Nancy Guthrie wasn't coming home. The hunt for answers regarding her disappearance is still very much active. The Guthrie families put up a $1 million reward for any info that helps bring her back home. or info that IDs who's responsible. The Pima County tip line is 520-351-49. Call the FBI at 1-888. Call FBI if you've got anything, however small. These aren't just empty offers. When a killer has that specific kind of insider knowledge about a victim's daily life, it's usually the people closest to that routine who hold the key to breaking the whole case wide open. It won't be some massive reveal, but a tiny detail someone's sitting on, not realizing just how much it actually matters. Whoever knows the truth here has likely been living with that heavy secret for weeks on end now. The weight of that knowledge, be it a cold fact or just a nagging suspicion, shouldn't belong to just one person anymore. It belongs to her family. It belongs to the guys working day and night to bring Nancy back home. And it belongs to the kind of justice this case is going to demand once it's finally put to rest. We've moved past the most basic, concrete fact in this whole mess, which is that absolutely nothing was stolen. We've looked at the ransom timeline that never saw a dime and the deep expert analysis provided by veteran FBI agents. They've gone on record with their assessment, using behavioral patterns that separate a real kidnapping from something much darker. Moving past a staged abduction, straight toward the theory the evidence is pointing toward right now. The theory is this: whoever took Nancy Guthrie wasn't looking for a payday. They just wanted her gone for good. They used the idea of a ransom as a smokescreen, just a way to stall and misdirect investigators, to put distance between the crime and the truth. But the plan failed. The violence wasn't supposed to happen like that. The way it all went down, the injury Bringwell calls a deviation from the script, might just be the thing that keeps this solvable. See, when a crime goes off script, it leaves a trail. Mistakes leave evidence the original plan never would have left behind. That blood on the porch is proof of the chaos, the panicked exit. Leaving her phone behind on the counter, medication left untouched. An 84-year-old woman snatched in her pajamas with no shoes is proof of a plan that spun out of control. That dead silence after the ransom deadlines, that's the mark of a perpetrator who couldn't keep up the charade. Because the money was never the point of any of this. None of this ends the nightmare. It doesn't tell us where Nancy is or who's really responsible for her disappearance. Or when her family gets the answers they've earned, the answers the evidence suggests are out there, waiting. What the evidence actually tells us is the nature of this crime. And the nature of the crime tells us who was behind it. Knowing what kind of person we're dealing with tells us exactly where to look and how to find them. Those former FBI guys, they aren't even talking about this as a ransom case anymore. Pima County isn't saying a word about negotiations. The task force is just head down, working, building their case, still combing through every lead. Nancy Guthrie's phone is still sitting on a counter in a silent Tucson house. Her medication is still there. Her purse is still there. Everything she'd have needed if she'd had any say in the matter. It's all just waiting for her to come back. But the crime committed against Nancy was designed to make sure she never did. Now, the investigation being built is specifically designed to make sure that killer's dark plan fails in the end. This breakdown reveals where the case really stands. But there is still so much more to uncover in this series. From the specific insider details to the full profile of the killer, we're looking at every angle they're working. Every piece of this builds on the last. If you've been following along and have a detail that hasn't been reported, it's vital to the search. This entire investigation depends on the collective intelligence of people who are actually paying attention. But for now, Nancy is still missing, and the person who took her is still out there in the dark.